Here we go. 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 All right. Email alert has come in. Stream should be going live in a second. There we go. Awesome. Email alert coming in now. Perfect. Hey, STS. How's it going, sir? Just starting up the stream here. Yes, I'm still getting over my nasty, nasty cold. Still have not gone away yet. So, it is what it is. There we go. Yeah, I had to get a haircut. My hair was getting way too long. It was unmanageable. The drink of tonight's choice starts with some old school Pepsi Cherry Vanilla. I wanted to do Cherry Vanilla. I'm not sure why. So, I wanted to try that out. Haven't had it in a long, long time. So, that's the drink for tonight. Ooh, have fun with that one. I've had no luck looking for him. And since Toys R Us's are gone, it's going to be very, very hard to find it unless you go to a specialty store or get it online. Clean my glasses and then we'll get started here. Oh, lovely. We're getting some buffering already. There we go. Just taking a look at the stream. Make sure everything's good. Everything looks okay. I'm not having any drop packets. I checked my speed. Everything looks good. How's the sound, STS? Does it sound okay? Please let me know in the chat. Awesome. So hopefully tonight will be a good stream. Hopefully it'll be an hour. I'm hoping it will be. I'm going to be talking about some very, very classic stuff, and that's going to be video game Flashback. Something a little different that I wanted to talk tonight about. I was going to do sci-fi versus fantasy, but I decided to hold off on that one. Put that one on the back burner for now, at least. And talk about some other stuff. So we're going to talk about that and see what we got. Hopefully we have some decent people into chat tonight, and we'll go from there. Give it a couple more minutes. Everything's looking good right now. The stream is holding strong with no issues, which I really, really like. Excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Let's see here. That would be a cool. Hey, Jackie, thanks for coming into the stream. How's your computer? Okay now? Hopefully you got it all sorted out. So hopefully we can do some good stuff. Very cool. Very cool. Drink for tonight, Jackie, is Pepsi Cherry Vanilla. Tonight. And then on deck, it's Dr. Pepper Cherry as well. I do like the cherry drinks. Very good, Jackie. So, let's start off the stream in a second here. I just want to refresh the other screen. See what we got here. We got... Just taking a look here. Very good, STS. There we go. Perfect. As you can tell, I'm still getting over that cold. It hit me pretty hard, actually. So, let's start off the chat for tonight for the stream. I want to thank everybody who's coming to the stream, STS as usual, and Jackie. I want to talk about something a little different on the stream tonight. First things first, as soon as I get another couple people in, I'll talk about the giveaway again, because I put it up, and it's in the actual link of this particular stream as well. As you guys know, I started streaming about 6 months ago. And I've talked about a lot of stuff on my streams. I've talked Funko stuff. I've talked paranormal. I've talked sci-fi. I've talked fantasy a little bit. I've talked Star Wars, Star Trek. I've talked toy collecting, regrets, which was so far my best stream to date. It actually has a lot of legs, meaning people still watch it even to this day now. It's been on, I think I put it up about 2 months ago, a month or two ago, and people still watch that stream, so I'm very, very happy about that stream. It's still doing really, really well. But I want to kind of circle back to that. Also, I talked about toys as far as collecting it past, present, and future. So I thought, you know what, I'm talking a lot about toys and comics. I haven't really touched base in video games. And that's what I want to do in this chat for tonight. Hopefully, you guys can actually ring in the comments. Hopefully, it's just not me talking and talking and talking. Hopefully, you actually speak up about your experience in video games as well. Now, I'm going to be talking about video game flashback, meaning I'm talking about older school gaming, both console and something that existed back in the day, that's right, called arcades. I'll talk about that as well. But I haven't really touched base on video games, and I have a big fond feeling for video games in my heart. I just don't game as much as I used to. I really wish I gamed more. I just don't have the time between YouTube, a new job, a girlfriend. I just don't have the time to do that sort of stuff as I really, really would want to. Yep, there's a new one coming out. I do know about that one. But I'm going to be talking about old school stuff. That's what I really want to bring to the table here is old school gaming, video gaming per se. And I want to bring you guys back to when I gamed, when I first started playing video games in something that was back in the day called an arcade. An arcade, you might see them now in Dave & Buster's or in Boomers if you have one in your location. Those are what they were back years ago called arcades. And those are places usually you would go to hang out, be with your friends, and that sort of stuff. Okay. But they had, like, arcades back in the day. I remember where I used to live in Central Florida, they had a sort of a clubhouse. And it had, when you go to the clubhouse, it would be a hangout place for all the young kids. You know, your young preteens, your teenagers would usually go there and play video games. And they were not free play games. You actually had to put quarters into machines or tokens to play these particular games. They'd have, you know, maybe 3 or 4 games and some pinball machines. And that was a place to usually hang out on a Friday or Saturday. You go to the clubhouse and play your arcades. More importantly than that is that you would go to your local, let's say your mall. Malls back in the day used to have arcades in the actual locations of those malls. Now, not so much. I have never seen a mall, at least to this day, a newer mall, or even one that was maybe a little older, have an actual arcade area designated to the actual establishment. They don't do that sort of stuff anymore, which is kind of odd. I know why the arcades have sort of gone the way of the dodo. It's because of the blossoming video game community, the video game consoles, the home consoles, basically made arcades redundant. Yep. I want to talk about some old school arcade machines. Specifically, I remember playing older school cabinets. Now, cabinets, of course, were stand-up cabinets that you would play, like STS says, like your Street Fighter, that sort of thing. But I remember the old school cabinets. Things like Space Invaders, which is what he talked about, Centipede, Dig Dug, Defender, another good one, Cubert, Frogger. Those are all old school games I remember playing religiously back in the day. Games like Akari Warriors wasted way too much money. Way too much money. I don't know if they had Mega Man for a stand-up console. They might have, but I don't remember. But those older school, really classic video games. Galaga, another great game. Classic shooting game. Yep. I've been actually on the hunt for one of those myself. The Medium Invader. The GameStop glow-in-the-dark one. I've not had any luck finding it myself yet. Come over here to take a look at this screen real quick because I want to refresh it. Real quick here. Refreshing the other screens. Yeah, we got... I think we might have lost Jackie again. Hopefully we didn't. We probably did, though. Nope, she's still here. I just keep losing people. Hey, Ringo, thanks for coming in to chat, sir. We're talking video game flashbacks. We're talking old school games. We're talking old school arcades. And we're talking about home consoles in a second. Usually I haven't really delved into gaming. I've been doing streaming for about 6 months now, and I haven't really touched base in the actual gaming community or the gaming space, so to speak. So I wanted to just touch base with my audience, with you guys, about at least classic gaming. As I mentioned, old school arcade games. Oh, your computer died out on you again? That's okay, Ringo. You're in a different sort of world now compared to compared to what gaming was when I was 13 years old. We didn't have things like PS4 or Xbox One. The PC market back then was very, very new, and it wasn't anything what it was now. But I remember the old school classic stand-up arcade games. You might have Ringno, that's how you pronounce it. You might have stuff like David Buster's or Boomers by You. That would be sort of like the ambiance or the feeling of an old school arcade. Many malls back in the day had those sort of old school arcades where you had machines lined up against the wall, and they would use most of the time quarters, sometimes tokens to play. It would basically be hangouts for young kids. That's what I remember back in the day. That's what I remember when arcades were really known and great. Yep, Pepsi Cherry Vanilla actually on this one, AA. Yeah, ring no. I do miss the old school arcades. I don't know. I know actually. I know why they died. It's because the home market, when it came to gaming itself, killed the actual arcades. Why would you go out to the mall to play games when you could do it at your house for free? That's the whole idea. And very similar to, let's say, different business model has made older businesses extinct. If you look at, let's say, Blockbuster and Netflix, very similar idea. They basically killed the prior generation to do something new. If you look at most retail stores, especially Toys R Us now, Amazon killed Toys R Us. That's one of the reasons why they had a huge loss. And that's why many Toys R Us's closed, or all of them in the U.S. closed. Let's see here. Cool. Very, very cool STS. I have not had luck finding one myself. They're really hard to get your hands on. But yep, we're going to talk about that too. I played old school wrestling games. We'll delve into that in a second. I'm not going to go anything, let's say, newer than the 90s. I want to keep it at least further back than that. Yep, it is RIP. So, I mean, as far as the old stand-up arcade games, what were your guys' favorite old school arcade games? Which one did you actually plug a ton of money into? I could tell you for me, Turtles in Time was a big one. The old school X-Men one, which I think you had 6 players, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Dazzler, Storm, Wolverine, I think maybe that was it, maybe one more possibly. But that old school, I think it was 5 or 6 different characters you could play as. That was a quarter munching machine. I remember that one adamantly. They used to have it at an old arcade here where around this area where I used to live. I definitely remember it. Centipede and Pac-Man, absolutely. Centipede, Millipede, very, very typical games like that. Old school Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Baby Pac-Man, I remember those ones. Space Invaders was another one. Definitely a quarter muncher. Turtles in Time, big time coin muncher. Absolutely, that thing ate your quarters like it was crazy. The Simpson Brawl game, I remember that one as well. Galaga, absolutely. Galaga was a quarter munching machine. Defender, Stargate, Moon Patrol, Cubert, Frogger. All these are classic games that I remember, have a lot of nostalgia about. Even the old school Street Fighter STS, absolutely. Now, if you guys remember before Dragon's Lair, another perfect great example, which was basically way ahead of its time, actually, for the stop motion animation they had for it. The Street Fighter game, the original Street Fighter game that was out, not Street Fighter 2, but the original one, had, I think, 4 buttons, but they were buttons like this big, massive big buttons that you had to really hit, and it had a joystick, but the buttons were massive. I don't know if I had 2 buttons or 4 buttons. It might have been 2 or 4. Old school Mortal Kombat back in the early 90s. I don't want to dig too deep into Mortal Kombat, but there's another one was a coin muncher as well. When you had fatalities, something completely different in the video game space that was not what was traditional back in the day. You had blood, you had violence. It was not your typical game. Super Mario Brothers, an original arcade game. Star Wars. I remember the old school Star Wars game where it was when you went through the Death Star and it was on it was wireframed. It was a wireframe game. You sat down in the actual cabinet and you had the X-Wing going through the bombing run of the original Death Star. I do remember that game adamantly. Another big quarter muncher. Absolutely. Absolutely. Joust. You can't forget Joust. Great game as well. I remember all these old school classic video games that swing back nostalgia. And that's where I wanted to make this dialogue with you guys. Because I usually talk toys or I talk sci-fi, fantasy. I'll talk my channel. I'll talk different things. But I don't really talk about old school stuff like this. One thing I wanted to talk about before I went too far is the giveaway. I launched a giveaway yesterday. Sponsored by Entertainment Earth. It is open up to all U.S. residents. The link is in the description box of this stream. It's also, if you go to the newest video, which came out yesterday, we're doing a prize pack giveaway for Funko. It's an all Star Wars prize pack giveaway. Frogger 2, absolutely. Some of the stuff I know that STS would like. We got Mr. Porg here. Classic Porg. There's 6 pops going up for giveaway. The Volt Pix Funko Pop. These are all Star Wars Last Jedi pops. The newer Luke Skywalker, how you saw at the end of the Last Jedi movie. The Caretaker pop. Kai Threnally. If I can close this box. Hold on, let me just close this box here. It's popping out at the bottom. Kai Threnally, right there as well. And Paige are all going to be going for a giveaway. Be running for 3 weeks until September 8th. Drawing will be taking place on September 9th. So definitely take a look at it if you haven't so already. Just wanted to touch base with you guys if you didn't catch the video yesterday. Miss Pac-Man, absolutely. Porgs are hard to find now for some weird reason. I don't know why. But whatever. It's open up to U.S. residents. If you're a U.S. resident, definitely hop over and definitely take part in that giveaway. It is free to enter. It is open up to all U.S. residents. Pole Position. Oh, AA. I remember Pole Position. Absolutely. That one, and I think Outrunner, I believe it was called. I think it was Outrunner when you drove the Ferrari and you had different music that would play. I think it was Outrunner. I want to say it was Outrunner. Hold on. That's going to drive me crazy. Let me take a look here. I think it was called Outrunner. I believe. I want to say Outrunner. I want to say it's Outrunner, but I'm probably getting the name wrong. I think it's Outrunner. Yeah, it's Outrunner. Absolutely, yeah. See if we can get an image here of it. 1 second here, hold on. Yeah, it was this one right here. Outrunner. You had like a Ferrari you were driving around. What it looked like when you sat down to play it was this. Dig Dug and Excite Bike. Yes, yes, yes. I remember me some Excite Bike. I don't know if they had Excite Bike in cabinets, but I do remember that one. I do remember that one, actually. Mario Kart. Mario Kart more newer than original. They actually have it in arcades now. I saw it at a Dave & Buster a few weeks ago. But let's move a little past arcades. Let's talk the next step in evolution of video games, which was basically the birth of the home console gaming industry. And one of the big consoles that really dropped back then was the Atari 2600. If you're not familiar, Atari 2600... Okay, Ringo, I keep pronouncing your name wrong. Ringo, take care. Thank you for coming in. Donkey Kong. You gotta love Donkey Kong. Absolutely. King of Kong. Great, great game. Love it back in the day. Donkey Kong Jr. Classic video game. Used to play that game a lot as well. Let's talk Atari 2600. That was probably my very first break into the video game world, so to speak. If you're not familiar, if you're a younger listener or watcher, Atari 2600 was a sort of brick-like console about this wide, about this high, and it had a slot in the front where you put a cartridge in. These were single cartridges most of the time, and this was the high tier of technology back in the day. You had sprites that would make different, let's say, objects. It wasn't what you see now. It was old school Atari 2600 and ColecoVision, absolutely. But the actual controllers they had for the Atari 2600 was not a joypad. It was a stick, and you had a button. That was it. That's all you had for a controller. It was a single stick with usually a yellow or red button. That was what you had. Chuck E. Cheese. Absolutely. Chuck E. Cheese's are still around now, but they're not what they used to be. I remember Chuck E. Cheese's back in the day, and it's nowhere near what they are currently. If you're a younger viewer, listener, you might go to Chuck E. Cheese. It's not what you remember Chuck E. Cheese to be like. I remember Chuck E. Cheese having hundreds of games. Now, not so much. It's a little bit different what they had nowadays compared to what they were. Um, but as far as the Atari 2600 goes, I remember old school games. I remember Pac-Man on the Atari 2600. It was not what you see Pac-Man in the arcade to be. It was not a complete transition, or it wasn't a, what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't a complete emulation from the arcade experience to the home console. It was completely different. It was completely rebuilt and remade. They made it feel kind of like Pac-Man, but it wasn't Pac-Man. Same thing with Centipede. It was close, but it wasn't exact. I think you had paddles on the Atari 2600, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think you had paddles as well you could have for certain games. Games like, people just come into the chat, drink of choice tonight is Pepsi Cherry Vanilla. That's what we're doing tonight. I remember the old, what was it? Pitfall. Another great game back in the day. Wasn't capable of the same graphics. Yeah, they couldn't handle the same type of graphic fidelity that the arcade machine had, and they had to basically rebuild it for the home market. Or maybe because it could have been a combination of graphic capability and fidelity, and probably maybe because of licensing. They might not have had the full license to the cabinet and the design and the sprites, which is definitely a possibility. But I remember the old Atari 2600 console. I had that console myself. I loved playing it. Missile Command. Another great classic game. Very, very hard game. Very, very difficult to play. What was your favorite Atari 2600 game, and what was the worst game you ever had? Hit me up in the chat, please. What was your favorite game, and what was your worst game on the Atari 2600? If you have one. Some people may or may not have one. Let me refresh this page over here. Boop. Let's see what we got over here. I think we have 5 people in chat right now, which is fine. If I get 5 or 6 people consistently in chat, I'm happy with that. For me, my favorite Atari 2600 game, I always liked Missile Command was great, and I remember Combat. Combat was a phenomenal game. Combat was, if you guys are not familiar, it was multiple versions of different games. You could play as a tank. You can play, and the tanks had different ways you can play. You could play with different obstacles in the way. You could play with bounce shots. You could play with invisible tanks where you couldn't see each other. You had planes as well. You had single planes, you had double planes, you had triple planes, and they had different versions or rule sets applying to these games. Okay? But I definitely remember. Okay, yes. But I definitely remember Combat. Missile Command, I absolutely loved Missile Command. Hard game. Yar's Revenge, that's another great one. Frogs and Flies, I remember that one where you would bounce from a lily pad to a lily pad and you had to eat flies. I remember that one, absolutely. Hard game, very challenging for the day. The worst game that was ever on Atari 2600. If you didn't know, I think it was probably, I think it was considered the worst selling game in history. I don't know if it was the worst selling game just in 2600 or across video game ever, was E.T. If you're not familiar, E.T. was such a horrible selling game that they actually took the copies they couldn't sell and they buried it, I think, in the desert. I wanted to say a landfill, but I believe it was a desert where they actually buried copies of these games. That's how bad the game sold, if you guys were not aware. It's also, they could call it a myth as well, but I think people actually found the actual site where all these Atari 2600 ET games were. Hey, King Snake, thanks for coming in chat, sir. The E.T. was such a bad game. What made the game excessively is extremely difficult to beat that game. Very, very hard to play that game. Um, a lot of people hated that game because it didn't really follow E.T.'s story in the movie. They just went with this really weird concept for a video game. Not the greatest game, in my honest opinion. Do you guys have, people just came in the chat now, King Snake, drink of choice tonight is Pepsi Cherry Vanilla. And then if I get done with that, we're going to go on to Dr. Pepper Cherry. Pitfall was kind of hard, absolutely. It was not an easy game. Pitfall was really challenging. I remember Yar's Revenge, as I mentioned a second ago. That was a fun game. I believe there was a game called Phoenix something. That was a fun one as well. But Combat, I definitely remember Combat. There was I think Combat also was the pack-in game for most Atari 2600s. I believe. Pitfall was really, really hard. Really hard. Now, as we move further along past the 2600, I believe they had another version of the Atari, but the kind of the birth of the real video game industry kind of took place with the NES. The Nintendo Entertainment System really kind of birthed in, I would say, the late 80s, the whole idea of the video game industry now. We're talking the NES where you would flip the front up and you put the cartridge in the front. Atari 5200, absolutely, which is a more beefy version of the 2600. ColecoVision, as AA mentioned as well. But the NES was really ahead of its time back then. I didn't own the NES. I had friends who had one because at that time they were really expensive, and my family really didn't have a whole lot of money. I had my 2600, and I would go over their house to play their Nintendo system. The NES was basically really ahead of its time. It was a really good system. Everyone remembers absolutely the old trick. If you couldn't get your Nintendo to work, you'd blow in the front of the cartridge and stick it in the machine, and miraculously it would start working again. It was sort of what people usually did. And 64 as well. But the original Nintendo console was a great forerunner in the actual gaming industry. You actually had real animation. When you played something, it felt like you were sort of an arcade. It was basically the arcade experience bundled up at home. Sega Masters was what I was going to get with next. The Sega Master System was sort of the competition for the NES. That's what the two big competing markets back then were. You had Nintendo and you had Sega. Those were the two big forerunners in the video game industry back in the day, in the days of yesteryear, so to speak. Absolutely. Gyromite. Never had that one. But the Sega Master System, I never had Sega Masters. I had a Sega Genesis. I did have a Sega Genesis. I believe one of the games on there, if I remember correctly, I think it was Altered Beast. I believe was on the Sega Genesis system. Because I think when you had Nintendo, it then transitioned to Super Nintendo, and then Super Nintendo's competition, I believe, was Sega Genesis. I could be wrong, but I think that was the competition-wise. But as far as the NES goes, no problem, Jackie. Don't worry about it. It's all good. Excuse me. But the NES system was sort of the trailblazer when it came to the video game industry. You had games like Metroid. Metroid was a great game, side-scrolling game. You had Castlevania, I think both 1 and 2, I believe. Castlevania, great side-scrolling action game. Absolutely phenomenal game. Oh, that's the robot thing, yes. That was the one where it had the little robot thing and he was holding, like, some type of top, I believe. He had his hands together like this. That I do remember that system. And also the old Nintendo one had the light gun. It also had the light gun where you play Duck Hunt, I believe it was. But yes, absolutely, old school. Absolutely. I do remember that old system. Rob the Robot. But I remember the Gyromite, absolutely. I never had it, the Gyromite. As I mentioned, I didn't have the NES. My neighbors had the NES system. I don't know if they had the Gyromite or not, but I do remember they had the light gun because I think when you had the NESs back then, they had different bundles you could have, and when you had like the full kit, you had the light gun, the gyromite, you had like everything. But I remember that you had a more watered down version of it. You wouldn't have, let's say, two games, maybe became one game. You had Duck Hunt. Yep, I heard about that. I actually heard about Alex Jones getting banned from YouTube. Yep, yep. They released a core system. I do, like I said, I do remember them coming out with different bundles for it, and they made different releases during the time. They still had to keep doing the cartridge blowing thing to make it work right. Now, was that just in your imagination? Was it all psychosomatic, where you think you're really fixing it, but you're really not doing anything? That I don't know. That I really don't know. But it felt like you were doing something when you actually did that with the game system. What was your guys' favorite Nintendo NES game? What was your favorite game? Couple for me. I definitely loved Metroid. R-Type. That's another great one. A great shooting game. Russian Attack, I believe it was called. Great game as well. It wasn't like the stand-up arcade. It was close to the stand-up arcade, a little different. Contra. Gotta love Contra. Zelda? I think Zelda was on NES, I believe. Yeah, Zelda was on NES. Donkey Kong. I don't know if it was on that or not. Mario Kart. I don't know if Mario Kart was on NES. It might have been, but I can't remember. It was on Super Nintendo. Super Mario Brothers, the absolute classic game. Absolutely, and the old school Mario Brothers game, Super Mario Brothers, that everybody knows now so well, so well. I believe that was usually the pack-in game in the bundle. Usually you got Duck Hunt and Mario Brothers. You might have gotten the Duck Hunt by itself with the gun, or if you bought the console without the light gun, you got Mario Brothers with a single controller. Absolutely. Classic game. Love Mario Brothers. To this day, still very, very fun to play. If you get the little... They took the NES and scaled it down much smaller to it's about a unit about this big. It comes with, I think, 45 games. I actually have that system. And they're preloaded games. They're little ROM. They're flash ROMs, basically. And you can play old school Mario. They have that. They had Excite Bike, another classic one. Absolutely. A mentioned the Excite Bike. I loved Excite Bike. Very fun game. Way, way ahead of its time. We were able to create your own tracks. You couldn't do that in games back then. To have your... No problem, STS. You couldn't make your own little world back then. You didn't have the capability. With the Excite Bike game, you can make your own tracks. And that was really fun to play. You could save your own tracks. Your friends could come over and you can play your own custom tracks. So it was really, really fun. Metroid, great game. Super long game. Time... excuse me. Time-wasting game. Absolutely. Same thing with Castlevania. Absolutely. Another one. Classic side-scrolling game. Love both of them. Russia Attack, as I mentioned. Great game. Zelda. Another great game back in the day for the old RPGs. Heck yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. What else do you got, guys? What other games do you guys like for the original Nintendo? What was the game that you disliked the most after that? What game did you really hate? Load Runner. I don't remember Load Runner. I don't remember Load Runner. I think I had Marble Madness, I believe it was. Where you had a marble that would roll down. It was actually in the arcade, too, where it came down a level, and you had to rock the joystick. And I believe when you had to... At that time, they were starting to really get involved with the gyroscope of controllers. So you would have to, you would shift the control back and forth, and the marble would pitch and roll. I don't know if it was for NES or Super NES. Baseball. Star Wars, absolutely. Old school Star Wars games. NES, gotta mention for NES, you just brought it up to my attention, collecting hobbies. Tecmo Bowl. Probably one of the best football games ever made, in my honest opinion, was Tecmo Bowl. You were mentioning AA for arcades, for wrestling games, the old WrestleMania game, I believe it was. It was very similar to like the X-Men game we're talking about, or Turtles in Time, where you had, I think you had 4 players. I think it was 4 players. I want to say 4 players. You could play as Mr. Perfect, Million Dollar Man, Ultimate Warrior. I think you play as Andre. I think you played as Earthquake, Jake the Snake. Absolutely, those are classic games. I remember even there was a pro wrestling game where you played. It might have been NES where you had the Star Warrior. He had a mask on. It was very very simple wrestling mechanics, but a great pro wrestling game. Absolutely, I can't remember what it was called, but it was absolutely a phenomenal wrestling game. I could play that game right now. It was old school. I loved it. Starman on Amazon. Yep, the Starman guy. Yep. Absolutely. That's the one I'm talking about. I think it was called Pro Wrestling. I loved that game. Love that game. Super fun game to play. Absolutely. Another good game in the arcades, if you never played it, was Saturday Night Slam Masters. It was sort of, think of a Street Fighter-esque game, kind of, sort of, with wrestlers. If you never played Saturday Night Slam Masters, very fun game. Let me show you a picture here. Very, very, very fun game. It was actually on the Super Nintendo. That's what it looked like if you never played it before. That's a picture of it. Very, very fun game. Kind of a screenshot of what it would look like. I'll let it load so you can see it. The entire level is the ring. There it is. You had Hagar from Final Fight fame. He was in it. Load Runner. Let me take a look at that one. Load Runner. I don't remember Load Runner. They made a Load Runner 2 also. Oh, okay. It looks something like this. That's Load Runner. It looks sort of like Elevator Action. That was another game I remember playing back in the day. Yeah. Saturday Night Slam Masters was on the SNES, though. But we're still talking a little NES before we jump to that one. But I definitely remember Starman. You were mentioning Starman for pro wrestling. Let's find that one real quick here. So I can show that one off to you guys. Wrestling. Let me find it here one sec. Excuse me. Starman. The cover, very cartoony looking to the game. This again was an NES game. If it will load, it's kind of not coming in really well. It's not focusing. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, that's what it looked like. Much better picture. Kind of, sort of. So yeah, pro wrestling. There was Starman. Old school. I definitely remember that game. Absolutely. Okay. So it was sort of a maze game. Yeah. But I remember those old school games. The pro wrestling game was great. Absolutely a phenomenal game. I think you had? Did you have Mike Tyson's Punch Out on that one? You might have had it on that one. I can't remember if it was NES or Super NES. Yep, NES was Mike Tyson's Punch Out. Little Dig Dug, absolutely. Can't go wrong with Dig Dug. Dig Dug was a very fun game as well. Very challenging game. But yeah, Dig Dug. Mike Tyson's Punch Out. Heck yeah. Um, I remember getting up to. I used cheat codes to get up to Tyson because I had the code for Super Macho Man. And he was tough to beat, but then Tyson would knock you out. You know, hit you once you're down. But yeah, I remember Mike Tyson's Punch Out. Absolutely. Another great game back in the NES days. Those are games that were nostalgic and classic. And that's what I want to talk about on this stream, is that nostalgia of the old school flashback for video gaming. That's what I like. Track and field. Absolutely. I remember a track and field game at an arcade where it had those parts that were buttons, and you had to hold a button to do like a long jump, and there would be like this arc that would appear, and you have to hold the arc. You have to hold a button down, and you see the arc go up, and then you release it to get, to jump. Or you did javelin throwing, and you would run and hold a button, and you pick where the person's arm would be throwing the javelin. The track and field power pad. I definitely remember that stuff. That was classic peripherals back in the day. That made Nintendo, it increased Nintendo's lifespan because those additional peripherals. They didn't have a whole lot of games that used that sort of stuff, but it was really cool when they actually used it. Very, very cool stuff. Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely dug those old school nostalgia feeling games. I mentioned Duck Hunt, the light gun game. They didn't have a lot of stuff to do with the light gun, but that was very, very fun as well. Any other games for NES that you guys really, really liked? Because I think Track and Field is one of the more expensive games now. I can't remember. I know a game back in that time frame is super, super pricey. It's considered a rare game. Very, very expensive. Very, very expensive. Absolutely. Any other NES games that you guys liked? As I mentioned, yeah, Metroid was one of my favorites. I love Metroid. Castlevania was a good one. That was one. I can't remember what it was called. Let's see if I can find it here. It was a volleyball game on Nintendo. That's what it was. If you guys never played this game, you have to play this game. STS, thanks for coming back. It was called Super Spike. It was a volleyball game. I played this in the actual arcade as well. Really, really, really fun game. What made it so much fun is that the arcade version of that same game looked a lot better. But you're playing big buff beach guys. But when you would jump up and you would hit the button and your hand would glow and you would hit the ball would literally turn like from a ball into like, let's say, it would concave. The ball would sort of like go from round to like, it would truncate down to like a tube. And when you hit somebody, you hear the explosion and the guy would get knocked back. Really, really fun game. Double Dribble. Oh, I forgot about Double Dribble. Great basketball game. What was the other one? Magic Johnson, and he played on the Celtics. He played on the Celtics. He used to hit threes. Larry Bird. I think it was Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. It was another basketball game. I remember that one. But I remember Double Dribble. Double Dribble was an awesome game. Same thing with Tecmo Bowl. If you never played either of Double Dribble or Tecmo Bowl, you owe it to yourself to play that game. And of course, you got to play with NBA Jam in the arcades. NBA Jam was so good. So good back in the day. NBA Jam was a classic game. But I do remember Double Dribble. Rygar. Oh yes, Rygar. The disc armor. Rastan. I remember Rastan. I remember Rygar. Let's look at the Rastan game. That was on Sega Master System. That was the cover art for the Rastan game for Sega. You mentioned you mentioned Rygar. They did a remake for it recently too. That was on Sega Masters as well. Let me find it here. It was a sort of an RPG sort of game. Here's a good picture of one here. Someone has a shot of one. There's Rygar. It was a Sega game. Disc Armor. Kung Fu. Heck yeah. I remember Kung Fu. There was also one where you played I think Kung Fu might have been the red versus the white Kung Fu guy. It might have been that one. Then there was one where you were going side-scroll Kung Fu. I can't remember what it was called. Let me see here. I'm using my phone a lot here, guys. I do apologize, but it's fun looking this old stuff up. Kung Fu game. Let me look here what the Kung Fu game was. Yep, that's what I'm thinking of. Kung Fu Master. That was 1985. 1985. Kung Fu. The old NES game. Then there was one where you played Battletoads. Absolutely, Mr. Summon Thing Basic 215. Absolutely. Kung Fu was side-scroller. Then you had one where you played a red guy, a red martial art guy versus a white guy. I can't remember what that one was called. Red versus white Kung Fu guy. I guess I'll call it Kung Fu guy. Game. Can't remember what you would call it. I know it was a red guy and a white guy. Year of Kung Fu. Yeah. I think that's what was Year of Kung Fu. That was an arcade game. I think that's what it was called. You were correct. Kind of, sort of. It's not the one I'm looking up, though. Not what I'm looking for. Street Warriors. Yes. Bad. Was it, Oh, it was, you played with... Battletoads was great. There was one game where you played, Bad Boys, something like that? Bad something. Can't remember what it was. It was a two-player game. You didn't play, it wasn't co-op, but you played one player and then the second player would play. It was Bad something. I don't know if it was Street Warriors or not. Thanks for coming into the chat, Mr. Something. We're talking vintage video games. We're talking classic video games. Arcades, old school arcade games. We're talking Nintendo, NES, and Atari 2600. We're talking really old school gaming. I wanted to do a little thing differently this particular chat. Let's look at Street Warrior. Take a look at Street Warrior here. Video game. Double Dragon. Gotta love Double Dragon. And it did have a Nintendo version. A little different than the normal version. Yeah, Street Warrior was more of a PS2 game. It was more of a newer game compared to what we were talking about. But yes. Double Dragon was in the arcade. It was in the home console. That's what I'm talking about here. I don't know if Final Fight was or not. It might have been. Off-Road Challenge. Yep. I remember all these old school games. So let's move away from the NES experience and let's go into the Super NES for the last 15 minutes of the chat here, guys. Let's talk the upgraded console. Well, we're talking also NES had, when NES had they had the Sega Master System to go against the NES. When the Super Nintendo came out, then you had the next version to go against it, which was Sega Genesis. So you had the SNES against Sega's Genesis system, and those had some great games back in the day. I mean, you had Super Metroid. You had Saturday Night Slam Masters, which is what I was talking about there. You had a Turtles game, I believe, was on it as well. A couple different Turtle games. I think there was a Turtle fighting game even on that one. Might have been. But those had some classic, absolutely classic games. What was your favorite, guys? What was your favorite SNES game? Mortal Kombat 2. Yes. I believe AA Mortal Kombat 2, didn't they have a code where you could put more blood into it? I think you could tone down the blood in one of those. I don't know if it was Mortal Kombat 1 or Mortal Kombat 2, but you could, let's say, make it more violent. That's when the whole violent thing was coming in place. Street Fighter 2 was breaking in to the forefront for the SNES. Absolutely. You had stuff like Altered Beast, a great side-scrolling beat-em-up game. Love that game in Sega Genesis. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. You had Mario stuff. Heck yeah. Mega Man. Absolutely. I think that, I could be wrong, mister, that's when you started seeing Mega Man X. That's when we started seeing, I believe, the next generation of Mega Man. You had X and Zero. I believe on the Super Nintendo's where you were starting to see it go from the original Mega Man franchise into the X series. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. Tons of codes, yeah. Tons of codes for Mortal Kombat. You made more blood. I think you made fatalities easier. All sorts of crazy stuff you could do with Mortal Kombat. For the SNES version of it, rather. I absolutely loved the SNES. I didn't have that one. I had a Genesis, but I didn't have the actual SNES system. Again, it was, I believe the Genesis system was a little cheaper than the SNES system at the time. Link, absolutely. Absolutely. Heck yeah, absolutely. I do remember definitely Mega Man X, great games. I talked about Saturday Night Slam Masters, really fun game. If you've never played a really kind of brawling wrestling game, sort of Street Fighter-esque, definitely take a look at that game. Really, really fun. Very, very much a classic game. Definitely dug it. I wouldn't say I was level of a pro, but I really enjoyed that game. Had super fun playing it. I almost went to a tournament for it, for Saturday Night Slam Masters. Again, it's more of a brawling wrestling game. Think of it as sort of Street Fighter with a life bar. Think of it kind of, don't think Street Fighter, think Final Fight. Because Hagar from Final Fight was one of the characters in it. So you had a big life bar. And you did wrestling moves. Really, really fun game. Absolutely recommend. If you've never played that game, definitely take a look at it. What other SNES games do you guys really, really like? What are things out there that you really dug, nostalgia-wise, for older gaming? What did you guys really, really like for SNES? We'll wrap it up in the next 10 minutes. We'll call it. I'm very, very happy we got at least 45 minutes out of the stream so far. I didn't think we'd get that much, to be quite honest. I didn't think I'd make it 30 minutes talking about video games. Because it's a very open subject. And a lot of people have their own opinions about it. I just wanted to come out from the perspective of more nostalgia. Looking at it from the older school gaming. Looking at arcades. Looking at Atari 2600s. Looking at the NES. The Sega Master System. The Super Nintendo. The Sega Genesis. The older school mentality of gaming. What it was years and years ago. Not what it is now. You have to look back at what it was in the past to what it is now currently. But absolutely. What do you guys have? Any other SNES games that you really, really like? One Life Man. Okay. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but okay. But yeah, any other Super Nintendo games you can think of that were really, really good back in the day? As I mentioned, my favorites. I think you had Super Double Dragon back then, too. I could be mistaken, though. I'm refreshing my screen here. Taking a look at what we got. Making sure the stream's still going. It still is. Absolutely. Good. But yeah, Street Fighter, I believe, was on the SNES as well. I know there was a Turtles game. I think it was a Turtles fighting game as well. I think on the Super Nintendo, you might have had Alucard for Castlevania when you played Dracula's Son. I believe. I could be wrong. I think you had it. I could be off there. Any other games that you guys liked for Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis? Sega Genesis as well. Donkey Kong and Castlevania, Mr. Absolutely. Castlevania on the SNES, great games. I don't even remember which one they had for the SNES Castlevanias. Let's take a look here. SNES. You had Castlevania 4, it looks like. And you had Dracula X. That's where you played, I think, as Alucard. I think you played as Alucard in that one. Congrats, One Life Man. Yeah, I think yeah, you had Castlevania 4 and you had Dracula X were the two games for SNES. Those were Konami games. Konami. Cool. Anybody have any other ones? Yeah, we talked Mortal Kombat 2, Street Fighter. Any other SNES games that you really, really liked? Because I think we're getting near the end of the stream, guys. Any other games you want to talk about in old school gaming? We're talking Atari 2600. We're talking arcades themselves, NES, SNES, Sega Master System, or Sega Genesis. Any other games you want to talk about a little bit before we wrap up the stream today? Because if not, we're going to close the stream out in a second. It's getting a little late. It's getting up to the 10 o'clock time frame. And we'll want to wrap the stream. I'm very, very happy. We talked a lot of stuff today. Very happy the way the stream came out. So with that being said, since no one else is going to be talking, I'm going to wrap the stream. And we're going to conclude here for tonight, guys. We're going to close it in 3, 2, 1. I want to thank everybody who came into the stream tonight. I'm going to be shutting it down. See you guys in the next stream. Take care, guys. And bye-bye.